start for the introduction. Yeah, good morning everyone and welcome to this PhD defense. And thank you all for coming here. Thanks to my committee members. Thanks Milind for agreeing to the external. And also people who took time of their work to attend this defense like Sudarshan, Leo, Rahul and Kishore there. Anyone else? So yeah, PhD defense is
looks like a popular guy.
Yeah, PhD defense is like a big occasion, a momentous event, and I have a lot of stuff to say about that, but I'll defer it till the end because I know you are all excited about hearing about utility and profit maximization dynamic spectrum allocation, so I won't keep you waiting. So okay, so what do we have here? So yeah, let's talk briefly about the technology trends in spectrum access, and as we all know, till now we have had pretty fixed allocations. Like in IS-95 we have fixed 1.25 megahertz channels, and we have fixed carrier allocations. Like each cell phone is tied to a particular carrier, like Sprint or Verizon. And going ahead, there are a lot of exciting stuff that's promised in the present and in the near future. Like we have these FCC and PRMs, which look into how vacant spectrum in TV bands could be used. And also IEEE has this Edward 22 standard which looks into such things. We have DARPA's next generation program for spectrum sensing and dynamic access for the military applications. We have this whole notion of femtocells, which are basically in-home base stations used for increasing coverage inside your houses. And the issue there is over what spectrum do they operate, and is this spectrum different from the spectrum used by the macro cells outside, or do they share the same spectrum in some dynamic fashion? And as recent as I believe October last year, Google put a patent saying that cell phones should not be tied to a particular carrier, they should be free to choose between different carriers. So the bottom line is, in the future we are going to see a lot of dynamism where users access both network resources and spectrum in a non-static fashion. So dynamic spectrum access is something which has been hotly studied by both the engineering and economics communities, and there are a lot of body of work, and I'll do a gross simplification and first talk about the policy regimes. Those who are interested in details can refer to Milind's paper in the latest lifespan. Very broadly, there are these two different kind of regimes for dynamic spectrum access. The first is the property rights regime, where someone actually owns the spectrum and they can buy it, they can lease it, they can sell and trade in spectrum. And the underlying belief is that a market for spectrum is going to yield an efficient allocation and solution. Whereas there's all the other people who believe in the spectrum's commons approach, and they say that no entity should actually own the spectrum and it should be shared by different people, and they can follow some intelligent protocol to see that there is no interference amongst each other, and interference should be managed by technology. And dynamic spectrum access has also been studied by engineers as a pure resource allocation problem. And there are also different approaches, and again some simplification. We can say the approaches are either centralized, like in cellular system, OFDM-based cellular systems where a base station controls how much spectrum you should get. Or there is all these distributed systems, like say 8.11, where each user follows the CSMA protocol distributed way and avoids interference. There also is body of work where what if they don't follow protocol but greedily try to maximize their power and spectrum access, like everyone Professor Rose and David have papers on these. And so the focus of this thesis is going to study the interplay of technology and economics in understanding DSA. So having said this, so this is broadly what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to formulate some such DSA regimes. The first one is a centralized and property rights regime where someone actually owns a spectrum and allocates it to people who need it. And in this regime, we're going to study two approaches. First is user utility maximization. The other is the service provider profit maximization approach. And within the service provider profit maximization, we are going to look at models where there is only one single service provider and hence can act as a monopolist. And the other thing is where there are different service providers, so there's some sort of competition. The other regime is a distributed regime where no one owns the spectrum and everyone's trying to access it in a distributed way. And over there we feel the most important problem is physical layer 1, and we'll formulate a symbol timing acquisition problem in this regime and see where it leads us to. So,
Excuse me, what was NC over there?
it's actually non-contiguous.
Non-contiguous.
So is this something you made up?
The term? No.
Okay.
It's there in the literature. So first, for the centralized DSLG, we propose this two-tier hierarchical model, and then we'll talk about how it's applicable. The model is a pretty simple one. At the top, we have some sort of a spectrum broker, maybe the government, maybe some FCC sort of body who control the spectrum. And in level 1, it allocates the spectrum to a bunch of service providers over here. And at the bottom, we have the end user customers. And in the second level, the service providers then allocate the spectrum to these users, and some actual physical level communication takes place. Example, it could be this level, could be OFDM, where different users allocate different tones. So we're going to see this picture pretty frequently. So what are the broad properties of this DSM model? So as I said, we are studying a joint broker to service provider and service provider to user optimization. We assume that different users allocated orthogonal chunks of spectrum, so there is no interference. And this allocation is based on some sort of user utility which models the user applications. Maybe downloading a huge data, so we need more spectrum. And this thing we model by user utilities. We also look into some sort of distributed implementation, and that being the service provider. So SP means a service provider. The service providers broadcast some sort of spectrum price, and given this price, the users maximize their utility that they would get if they buy some spectrum, minus the cost they would incur if they bought that spectrum, and then they decide how much spectrum to use. And again, this price is decided by the operating principle of the network, whether it's the customer utility maximization or service provider profit maximization. I'll talk more about it later on. Another important assumption is that these users are non-strategic. It means they follow this given protocol. Like given a price, they just maximize the utility and convey this information back to the service provider. They don't try to greedily maximize their objectives. So some related work, like again, Milling has this whole body of work where he proposes a multi-tier spectrum allocation model. And the idea there is there's a spectrum broker who would grant short-term licenses to people who need spectrum, and he terms this coordinated access band, which is a big pool of spectrum from which this license will be given out. And I was talking about this Google patent filed in September 2008, which says a mobile phone should be able to choose between different carriers, and carriers should actually bid for users which per minute and connection cost. So we believe that our model provides the theoretical foundation for all these exciting things. Problem statement: given this model, assume a steady state fluid model for arrival processes, transmitted rates, and I think I talked about this before, that formulate the allocation problem from utility maximization and profit maximization frameworks, calculate the optimal prices and spectrum allocation. And these are also very important, that we will get some concrete results, but apart from that, we are also going to generate some insights and see whether they could be used to design something more important. So we start with the utility maximization model. So these are the system variables. So at the top we have the broker, and we assume that the broker has a net spectrum of W. And let's say this is service provider I. By the way, for the whole of the work, the index I will denote a service provider, and index J will denote a user. So just to make it clear. So let's say a broker gives spectrum capital Xi to service provider I, and then service provider I allocates this spectrum to, let's say, this user J. So first it allocates spectrum X sub Ij to user J and charges a spectrum price mu. After that, there is an uplink communication where user J transmits at a power P sub Ij to service provider I at some rate R sub Ij, and we assume a flat varying channel coefficient. So user J can transmit to all the service providers. So the total rate it gets, R sub J, is just the summation of rates it transmits to all the service providers. And we assume that user J has a utility function which basically models its application, which is an increasing and concave in the rate. So this is the utility maximization problem, the centralized version. So let's assume there are n service providers and n users. So if you see, this is just the total rate of user j, summation to transmitted to all the service providers I, and this is just the summation of utilities of all the j users, and this is just the Shannon expression of rate for rate at which service user j transmits to service provider I. This much you recognize, and this fraction eta I is a term which we introduced to differentiate between different service providers, and we say that this term is an efficiency of service provider I, that is a fraction of Shannon capacity that service provider I can reliably offer to user j. And this might depend on factors like maybe the service provider j has a better decoder, he has a better turbo decoder, so he can give a better fraction of the rate, or maybe he has some sort of MIMO receiver, so there's a preload term. This, if you see, with the total spectrum constraint and service provider I, which is just the spectrum it has to transmit to all the L users. This is a constraint of user j, the total transmit power constraint on user j is nothing but the sum of powers it will transmit to all the n service providers. And this is the total spectrum constraint in the system.
Excuse me, JD, are you assuming FDD or TDD separation between up and down?
It's just, we are just considering the uplink transmission.
So it's only uplink at this point.
Initially there's some spectrum allocation, and then after that the transmission is uplink. So this was the centralized version. We solved this. We found a distributed implementation through Lagrangian dual decomposition. And in the solution, what we saw was that each service provider charges the same price mu.
Really, before you go for clarification questions, go back to the diagram 2 slides before. So the assumption is that the Xi that is being allocated to the service provider, that's the spectrum in which the users are doing their uplink transmissions. Is that?
Yeah.
So how is the knowledge of Xi communicated to the user before they actually? So the notion of bootstrapping, is there a notion of a
So I think,
pilot channel of some kind?
Yeah, I think it's more like the users first tell how much spectrum they need, and then the service providers go back and ask the broker that this is.
So there's a persistent channel of some kind that.
So we are talking about those controlling issues of it, and we are focusing on resource allocation. But yeah, those things are assumed. So we solved this thing by Lagrangian dual decomposition and showed that in the optimal solution, each service provider charges the same price mu. And this is again because the objective was some utility maximization. And other thing is there is no interference because each one was getting an optimal chunk of spectrum. And each user j, and this is a local problem at each user j, what it does is it just maximizes its surplus, which is its own utility, minus its spectrum cost. So if you see, this term is the total spectrum it gets from the n service providers times the spectrum price, its power constraint and rate, and this is a local problem.
So the service providers don't maximize anything, they have to...
No, this, as I said, is the utility maximization framework. So later on, we'll talk about models where service providers have their own profit motives.
Excuse me, why you're saying that there is no interference?
We assume because we said that within the system, users are getting optimal chunks of spectrum. That seems to be the norm in all cellular systems. Like the interference is only from out of cell interference, but within the cell, each users are getting optimal frequency.
So if you are using the OFDM, like non-continuous or whatnot, whatever. In order for FDM tones to be orthogonal, they have to be time aligned within their cyclic prefix. Usually, if you have FDM transmitters belonging to the same carrier, the communication between the base station and the mobile during the establishment of the call make sure that they are time synchronized. Now you have a single user which talks to multiple carriers, Verizon, AT&T, whatever. Who will take responsibility to actually time align the whole thing across the entire network, or the locality of the cells?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So,
I didn't look into that.
So actually, no. Yeah, you have an answer for that? I was going to say something in a sentence. I'll let you say it. Let's see what
So
you say.
frankly, I mean, I didn't think about that aspect, and but there are some things like, though I'm calling a different service provider, it could be like the same service provider in the region has set up different access points, so that to increase a better access to spectrum.
A big problem for WiMAX has been to actually convince the carriers that WiMAX is able to synchronize all the users and all the base stations across the area where it really matters. Because the moment you cross the cyclic prefix boundary, your tones are not orthogonal, and the health work breaks loose.
Look, I think that's a valid point, right? But the idea is that if people are able to sort of figure out how to solve the problem, which means they coordinate or cooperate, then I think you can sort of think of this model essentially sort of what is the best thing to do when there is sort of this kind of
As an alternative, one can take this model and just add interference.
Yeah, but no, I don't think so. I don't like that at all. So think about LTE, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does uplink and LTE work?
It's actually
Single carrier, right? But then the idea is still that the base station is the one that completely controls everything. The mobile is just sort of, as he says, a non-strategic
Absolutely
user. So
true.
therefore, I think this model
And now
is
the question is,
pretty applicable there. The question is then how do you coordinate
there's
across
now
different
3
carriers?
base
I agree.
stations, you see.
So that
Not one.
you need some coordination. And I think in this model, right, go back and show your clearinghouse picture, right? So
That's
that's
three.
so that basically has to figure out that if these 3 guys want to get spectrum
Yeah.
from that
And these
spectrum
3
broker,
guys belong
then
to
there is
3
coordination.
competing carriers. So they
Yeah,
might not
yeah,
Yeah, but
necessarily
similar in
be
a local area, in local region, it's not like a cell phone system where we have a whole city-wide coverage. Maybe in a local region, there are 3 providers who want to provide.
Yeah, they have to
And
really interact closely.
Yeah, and then interact through the broker. I mean, through the broker, and then
So I have another question, right, about this. If you introduce a downlink, do you think still you get the same result?
same result as in the.
Like you're saying right now, each user should just go to one guy.
We'll see that in later.
So you're going to introduce a downlink?
Yeah, we have it in the second.
Oh, I didn't realize explicitly we're introducing the spectrum allocation.
So so as I said, this was a local user problem, and so how is this price? I said there's only one single price in the system. So this price is set that the entire spectrum is utilized. So this is a price update equation. If you see this term, this is just the sum of spectrum which user J gets from all the service providers and all the users. So the total spectrum demand from all the users, and this is total spectrum available. So let's take the case where the total spectrum demand is actually more than that available spectrum in the system, and you can see that this term will be negative, and overall the price in the next iteration is going to increase. So this price, as I said, increases if there's overutilization of spectrum, decreases if there's underutilization. So overall the price is set at a level where the entire spectrum is utilized. And again, this pricing scheme is only because the operating principle was to maximize some utility. If there are profit maximizing service providers, of course they can charge high prices. They don't have to charge a price for the entire spectrum is utilized.
Am I right that this equation essentially is indicating some sort of a linear relationship between so every iteration when the price changes, that relationship never seems to have an exponential component, right? Because there will be some practical scenarios where price needs to increase much more rapidly than
So that actually depends on
equation is
step
impact,
size.
huh?
We can have a step size here about how the price changes each step. So it doesn't have to be. So this step size could actually depend on this constant also.
It's a difference equation, right?
Yeah. So maybe if this gap is not a huge gap, then this alpha could also be larger.
So sulfur is not a constant here, saying it's a function.
It's not
of
actually. I
something.
don't need as a constant here, but it could be a function of this term also. So it's much more rapid. If this gross underutilization, you might want to hike up the prices much faster.
I think
So-
this is, I was going to say, this I think is kind of an open research question as to the dynamics of how you would do this adaptation to.
Because in the
to-
thesis, I don't think he addresses how.
No, it's really.
In fact,
doesn't.
the real issue, right, is that he sort of assumes that you have a given set of channels and then they're all sort of fixed and then all this happens. But I don't think that's how it'll work.
The
So therefore-
dynamics of this is.
So therefore, I think this thing is just assuming that the whole world is now static, right? And given the
So I'm
static
saying the allocation
channel.
is based assuming it's static. Of course, if the local, because it's fast to do.
But if you're trying
otherwise.
to sort of go between, answer questions of how, they're asking questions related to how you're going to go across service providers and how you're going to sort of adjust to the dynamics of things change.
So one thing is we could
Spectrum efficiencies
reallocate.
change all the time,
Yeah,
right?
one thing is we
So-
reallocate, redo this problem every time there's a significant change in channel conditions. Maybe there are more users who come in, the N and L changes. So that's one answer. And The other thing is we do the allocation based
I think
on
the answer is
loss
I don't think your model addresses the dynamics of what the questions we're asking.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the
Perfect
answer.
answer.
Thank you. That's the answer.
So is that the result that a user should go only to one service provider, or he can just
I'm coming to that. Till now I haven't spoken anything more. So we have a distributed protocol which based on the equation we showed in the last slide, and the protocol is at each time t the service provider broadcasts the spectrum price, and given the spectrum price each user gets all what spectrum it needs from all the service providers and what power it should transmit. It conveys back this information to the service providers and they use it to update the price equation. And convergence is guaranteed because we have nice concave functions and rates are concave and utility functions are concave, so the guaranteed convergence. So now we have some set of results. The first set of results is, remember we started with the generic assumption that each user could obtain service from all service providers. When we examined our model, we found that in the optimal solution, each user j transmits to only one service provider I. And that service provider I turns out to be the one for whom your surplus is maximized. To give an example, let's say all the service providers are equally efficient and you are just maximizing rates. Then the service provider turns out to be the one to whom you have the maximum link in. But that need not be the truth. Different service providers have different efficiencies. And so we have this simplified model over here. So let's say this user j, and this is the service provider to whom it's transmitting I star of j. And we have some notations like this. Let this be the efficiency of the service provider to whom he is transmitting, denoted by the star. Let this be the link gain h star of j. And since he is transmitting to only one service provider, he is transmitting with his full power, p of j. So the operating SNR at the uplink transmission is nothing but h star j times his entire power pj over x sub of j. And so let's see some results we get. So let's say we are trying to just maximize rate. So what we see that each user j operates at a unique SNR, which is given by the solution of this expression. And let's see what it means. So if you see this function, this is an increasing function of SNR. What this means is if let's say there's an increase in mu or decrease in the spectral efficiency, decrease in the service provider efficiency, the operating SNR increases because it's an increasing function, which means there's a decrease in allocated spectrum x star of j. And since SNR increases, the users transmit at a higher order modulation. So what this means is if your price increases, that forces you to buy less spectrum because the price has increased, and to compensate for that, you are transmitting at a higher spectral efficiency. That's what it means. And this also means that if a service provider transmits with a higher efficiency, the effective price is for that spectrum service provider reduces. Because mu is same for all service providers, but they can have different efficiencies. So users see different effective prices from different providers. So, but if you are just maximizing rate,
Sorry.
yeah.
So there is some cost associated with higher order modulation, right? So that's not reflected here?
That's not reflected here, that's in the second model, because that cost is to a service provider, and then it leads to issues like if he's incurring a cost, he should try to maximize his profit. That's what we look in the second part. So over here, if we just try to maximize rate, it's unfair for the far higher users because we see that the user with the best link in ends up taking all the spectrum. So we consider other utilities, other concave functions of utilities because they lead to more fairness. And this is just one example. What we analyzed and found out was, let's say an example where there are two users who have the same link gains. They transmit to a service provider who has the same efficiency, and they transmit with same transmit power Pj. So if we have two users with these quantities same, the user with a higher derivative of his utility function gets more spectrum. And this is known as the marginal utility in economics. To give an example, let's say utilities are exponential functions of this rate, where gamma j is a target rate. And we see that users with higher target rate get more spectrum because your marginal utility depends on this target rate. So next set of results is what we call improved access. So for understanding this, let's consider another set of utilities which we call alpha utilities. given by this form, and 1 over alpha r to the power alpha, and when alpha is 0, it's just a logarithmic. So if, as you can see, if for higher values of alpha, the stress is more on maximizing rates. Because if alpha is 1, it's just UR is R. So we see that for these kind of users, if users have these kind of utilities, if for a particular user J, if his channel, if his link gain to his SP2 which is transmitting to increases, or if his transmit power increases, he gets more spectrum and he derives a higher utility, and the overall spectrum price in the system increases. And this we interpret by saying, if his link gain increases, there is better access to spectrum. Which means if he gets the same amount of spectrum, he can derive a higher rate because he has a better link gain. So it's almost as if, like Roy came up with this analogy. Spectrum is like some beachfront property, like you have those houses in the beaches, where people would like to go. Now if you build better roads so that you can travel better to the beaches, there's going to be more demand because now you can access the beachfront property better. So it's the same way over here. Since you have a better link gain, you can access the spectrum better, so there is more demand and the price goes up. Some more results, they're fairly simple. We are able to show that if the number of users goes up, the spectrum price goes up, and that's because there is more demand for spectrum and more users. And also, if the number of service providers go up, the spectrum price also goes up, or maybe it stays the same. This might seem confusing because sometimes we think if there are more service providers, the price should fall. And it doesn't happen because the total supply of spectrum is still the same. It's capital W. It's not as if there are more service providers, there are more spectrum in the system to be allocated. The total spectrum is still the same. However, if there are more service providers, it's possible that some users have better link gains to the service providers. Gets a service provider to whom he has a better link gain. And in the previous slide, I showed that if his link gain increases, the spectrum price goes up because he has better access now to the channel.
So if the cost of spectrum service providers are included in this model, I think this kind of
it will change. We'll see that.
John, so that interference temperature is just we are saying that if the mu goes up. So what are you trying to say? It's like interference temperature.
It's actually, I was trying to say, what I was trying to say is, in our system, we don't actually have an interference because each one is getting separate spectrum. However, if there are more users, you end up getting lesser spectrum because someone else is also demanding it. This is somewhat similar to a case, if there were interference, in that case it would mean that the total interference has gone up, so utility goes down. So it's similar to that. Over here there's no interference, but you're getting lesser spectrum. It's just an analogy.
So what is the time scale of your allocation? If you allocate a certain number of channels, how long this allocation stays in place?
So again, it brings up to the question, as Narayan said, I'm fairly assuming static channels. So the time scale would be like the time scale for which the channel says static, and which we assume is the time scale of a session. Like all these allocations are taking place over a session where a user might have to send a big file in the uplink. We make the assumption that during that session, the channel stays the same.
And that's like minutes or seconds or?
Maybe minutes, yeah.
So what happens if during this time the user suddenly doesn't have anything to set? So these channels will still be allocated to
No,
this
it won't,
user,
because
but
in
they
the-
will be wasted.
No, it won't be, because what we assume is in the utility maximization model, right? We assume that only those users who have something to send, they are participating in that maximization problem.
Yeah, but you're saying your time scale is minutes. A user might be, the offered traffic to a user or which user generates can change actually on a second basis. Like I click on a web page, and then I have for the next half a second, I have several packets received. And then I'm reading. For the next 30 seconds, I'm not sending anything. And then I click again. Then it's all.
Yeah, that's true. But the thing is, we assume the full buffer.
Also, it's
over
a
here.
just FTP type of traffic.
Yeah, where we assumption you always have something to transmit. So all
Okay,
this,
cool.
all those things, and that's a particular typical assumption to make when we deal with utility functions and the maximization. Like they model those cases where you have traffic to send. Else, as you said, we'll have to
Yeah,
see
but
the
it-
queue lengths maybe, and if they are actually
is
not.
not the
No, there,
typical
no, there are
technology,
no, there are formulations where you can do expected utility, where you can take sort of all this stuff that he's talking about, right, and talk about an expected utility maximization. That's a different ballgame,
Mhm.
right? And so
Yeah, I meant by just this pure utility maximizations and. But the more important thing is we assume a full buffer situation.
Full
and
buffer, so
assumption is people have things to transport. So,
I have
some
a lot of questions in the context of the time constants of these operations, but I think I'll reserve them for the closed session. In the interest of time, we could use it to distraction.
So, some numerical examples. So we have this very simple situation where there are like two service providers spaced 500 meters apart and two users. The second user is fixed, whereas the first user is mobile. It moves. It starts from a position very close to service provider 1 and moves all the way to a position very close to service provider 2. Providers have different efficiencies. Again, d sub ij is the distance between service provider I and user j. And we have a path loss model based on the COS 231 propagation loss. And we use this exponential utility which I talked about earlier. And if you plot this is what you get. It has a rising portion, and by the time it reaches its target rate, gamma it sort of becomes flat because it flattens out at gamma. So we consider users who have two different target rates, the low rate given by 10 kbps and high rate given by 1 mbps. So we consider different cases. So we have two users, and user 1 could either have a low target rate or a high target rate, same for user 2. We also vary the efficiency ratios of the service provider 1 and service provider 2. And as I said, service provider user 2 is fixed for a distance, and there's a net spectrum constraint. So let me walk you through this diagram and say what this means. This plots the fraction of spectrum that user 1 gets out of the total spectrum, plotted versus the position of user 1 from service provider 1. If you remember, he was mobile. So let's first consider these two cases.
So here again, you're moving them to different points and then doing this optimization.
Yeah, okay, exactly. So for each one of these points, positions of service provider 1, I'm doing the whole optimization. So let's focus on these two graphs. So these two graphs are for the cases where both users have a high required target rate, 1 Mbps. So let's focus on this broken line. This broken line is the case where both service providers are equally efficient. You see, and eta 2, eta 1 is 1. So what we see is initially service provider user 1 was connected to service provider 1, and at this point it switched over to service provider 2, because if you see it's exactly at the midpoint, 250. Because since both providers are equally efficient, the only thing which matters is the link gain. Because if you remember, I said thanks to a service provider which is a better link gain, and exactly at the midpoint service provider 2 started having a better link gain, so it switched to service provider 2. And again, if you see during this portion, it was getting far away from service provider 1, it was connected to service provider 1, so it is getting lesser and lesser spectrum. And from this point onward, it's getting closer to service provider 2, so it gets more spectrum. Now let's look at this graph, which is essentially the same thing. However, the switch occurs much earlier because service provider 2 in this case is 10 times more efficient. So user switches to him much earlier, even though he is at a greater distance from service provider 2. He switches much earlier. And so the other thing to see over here is, in this case, let's focus at this regime. In this regime, he is very close to service provider 2. Service provider 2 is very efficient, and if you see, he's already got so much spectrum that he doesn't require anymore, even though he's getting closer. Because if you remember, he has an exponential utility which kind of flattens out the high spectrum. And let's consider these two cases. These two cases are same. However, in this case, user 1 has a low target rate, and user 2 has a high target rate. And we see, since he has a low target rate, he gets less spectrum than he was getting when he has a high target rate. And that sort of seems to be invariant of his position, because the majority of the spectrum is taken up by the guy who has high target rate, which is user 2, and he was sort of fixed. His position did not change. And the other thing is the case where he had a low target rate and service provider 2 was more efficient. He's always connected to service provider 2, which means that there is a bias to be connected towards the more efficient provider. And that's
So the user 2 switching or not is not clear from this.
user 2 is not switching.
No,
It's not. It's not clear from this diagram.
Can they-
So, isn't it just like you always connect to someone with the best spectral efficiency?
Well, I'm saying it depends. It is in a way, but that's not a direct relationship, because the link gain, there are two terms here, the link gain and the efficiency.
Yeah, but the efficiency is something you introduced, right? But I'm just saying, bottom line is whatever spectral efficiency you see to a particular base station, you're going to connect to that, the one that's better. Is that
Well, it's not
your
always-
answer or not?
It's not always, no, it's not, because it also depends. So in this model, there is a fixed spectrum, and how much spectrum you get also depends on what spectrum demand the other guy makes. So your own spectrum and to which provider you connect to, it's also dependent on, like in this case, let's say in this case, let's say this graph and this graph. Over here, he switched on to the more efficient provider at this time instant. Whereas over here, it always connected to service provider 2. That's the only thing changed between these two cases was he had a computer who was like the other user also demanded more spectrum. So since it's a joint optimization, it kind of depends on what the other users are demanding in the system. So it's not always that straightforward.
The issue is, it's in terms of math, it's because this efficiency factor is a pre-long term. So you're getting an interaction between this pre-long term and an SNR term that's inside the log. So it would be exactly what you said, if somehow the efficiency term were a thing that just improved your SNR if it were inside the log. I kept saying the same thing there for about a year before you showed me some examples.
So,
The exact solution is sort of a little more complicated than just a single efficiency number that you choose the best one.
So in this case, maybe even for these regimes, the service provider 2 was more efficient, but the switch happened later. Whereas over here, it was always kind of service provider 2. The only thing changed in these two graphs is over here he had a low required target rate, so his relationship with the other user changed. The link gains and efficiency is the same for these two graphs. The only thing changed is his relationship with the other user, and so that we are seeing can affect to which provider you connect to. Because if the other user has a high required, okay, it's something like this. The other user has a high target required rate. He's hogging up all the spectrum. So maybe it's in your interest to get little spectrum and connect to the more efficient provider. Whereas in the case if both users have low required rates, then maybe spectrum is plentiful in the system. Then you can afford to connect to a provider who is not that efficient because you're getting spectrum from it. So all these things come into picture.
So the target rate is conditioned on what the users will get it.
No, it's a fixed thing. Target rate is down. The exact rate he gets is depends on the target rate is fixed. So okay, now we move on to the cases where
so suppose I made the utility 0, 1. What happens then?
utility 0.
0, 1. Because 0, 1.
Oh, okay. What happens in 0, 1? So I think I'm not sure actually. I will think about that because a lot of these results were contingent on the fact that we have concave utility functions. Like we have a result which says that no matter how what the conditions are, how bad your link gains are, you will always be allocated some spectrum, even with some tiny mode. And that's because if you don't, then your transmit power is wasted. Each user has their own transmit
Yeah, so
power.
0, 1 means the way to think about it is that there is a minimum rate.
Yeah.
I'm putting a minimum rate constraint on my problem, and then I'm saying about that I'm happy or near maxed out, and below that I have nothing.
Or is there a minimum rate constraint?
That's
I
what
think
0,
there's a
1
bunch
means
of,
that.
okay, yeah, you're right. So I think what happens in that case is a bunch of users who transmit exactly at the minimum rate, and above that, the allocation takes place as if there's no minimum rate. But I think I have to think more about it. Well, I looked into it like some time back, same problem, the minimum rate, and I remember I had some results then, which. So yeah, so moving on to service provider profit motives, and you people have been asking questions about this. So we start off with a simple model. Again, there's a broker, and we first consider a case where there's only one service provider. And now the model is the service provider actually buys some spectrum X, and he's charged by the broker for whatever spectrum he buys. And then again, there's user J, and in the downlink, he first allocates some spectrum X of J to user J and charges some price mu and kappa, and we'll talk more about this. And now we have a downlink transmission. So in the downlink, the service provider now transmits to the user's J over this allocated spectrum X sub J. And he transmits, the important difference here is, he transmits at a power spectral density of new watts per megahertz instead of a fixed power constraint. And let me highlight it once again. So in the previous model, we are having uplink communication. So the mobiles are typically limited by their battery life. So thinking of a fixed power constraint made sense over here. However, in a downlink communication, a base station should not have a fixed power constraint. It can be connected to a electric supply. What makes more sense is an FCC-induced power spectral density limitation. So we assume that it transmits at a fixed power spectral density. So if it allocates a larger spectrum, it means it's transmitting a larger transmit power. So the rate a user gets is again spectrum times the spectral efficiency, and spectral efficiency is given by this term 1 plus mu Hj divided by n naught. This spectral efficiency to user J. So we'll be seeing a lot of these things later on, so just keep them in mind. So now we have some cost model for the service provider because he's actually buying, we have spectrum from the provider. And the cost model is a very simple one. You can assume there are two sorts of costs. First is a spectrum cost for spectrum which he pays to the broker. And that cost is, in the paper we just consider a simple linear relationship, C times X. And this constant C might depend on the geographical region. Maybe if you're buying spectrum at a dense urban region, then maybe you have to pay more per unit of spectrum. We also assume that there is a power cost because if you see, he's transmitting at a power mu times capital X, where capital X is the spectrum he bought. So we assume that there is a fixed linear power cost. And this linear power cost, again, it might just be electricity cost because it's transmitted at a higher power. It might also be induced by the broker because there might be other licensed users in the band X. If it's transmitting at a higher power spectral density, some of it might split to adjacent bands. So there is some limitation. He should be penalized for his if he's transmitting at a higher transmit power. So we have this power cost. So again, what are the objectives of the different players in the game? So we have a service provider who maximizes. Now his objective is to maximize his net revenue. So his expenditure, as I just explained, is the spectrum purchase cost and transmit power cost. And his income is because he's charging the users some price for giving them the spectrum. And the users, again, they maximize the surplus. If you remember, surplus is the utility minus cost. And their expenditure is this same term, that is the charges they pay to the SP. And their gain is because of they're buying some spectrum, their total utility is increased. So thus we consider both their motives, and not just the motive of the users, which was there in the previous model. So now we move on to something known as monopolistic pricing. So since there's only one service provider, he can actually charge a two-part tariff from the users. And this two-part tariff is broken into two different kinds of costs. One cost is mu, which we looked in the previous work, which is a variable spectrum usage fee. Like if you purchase X amount of spectrum, you pay mu X. So mu is dollars per megahertz. That's the unit of mu. And kappa is just dollars. It's just a fixed subscription price, which you pay every time you obtain service from the provider. So based on these two costs, user decides how much spectrum to buy. It communicates this back to the service provider as it was doing in the last model. So let capital X be the aggregate amount of spectrum that all users demand. So service provider goes and buys this much spectrum from the broker. So if you remember, the total cost to the service provider now is capital C superscript S, where S denotes service provider times X, and this is just the spectrum cost plus the power cost, if you remember. And the service provider optimizes this price pair to maximize his own profit. So that is a model. So before we go on to the specific of the solutions, let's just pause for a second and think, what do these numbers really mean? So as I said, the service provider transmits with a spectral density mu. So if you see, if he raises mu, he effectively raises the spectral efficiency K sub J. He's transmitting at a higher spectral efficiency. He's going from BPSK to QAM. So he has to correspondingly improve the transceiver technology because it's transmitting at a higher bits per second per hertz to support the reception at a higher spectral efficiency. So what it really means is our parameter nu is really a parameter which captures at what technology is transmitting at. So if it transmits at a higher nu, in effect means he's switching on to a better technology. So that's something I want you to keep in mind.
So why would you put that inside here, the log? If I look at something like MIMO, right?
Yeah.
The scaling happens outside that.
It does, but that MIMO is not captured over here. It's just
That's not transceiver technology. Suppose
it is.
suppose
Okay, so
somebody
this is not
installs base
complete.
station
I'm just
MIMO.
saying you're switching from maybe BPSK to QAM. So this term is just bits per second forward. So that increases. You're right. It could have been. There could also have been a term outside the log, which incidentally we had in the last model. And
Right. So that's why I'm.
so and Roy asked
went
this
away from
question
that.
to me like, why don't we like have a model where we have both? And so which I have not done.
Because I don't really see going from BPSK to whatever, some QAM or something as a big leap in technology. It's just like changing your constellation from something to something else. So I think the big thing is if I put multiple antennas, right, then I can get sort of dramatic gains. And so I think the more interesting thing is out there.
Yeah, you're right. I agree. And this is something which we plan to look into.
But
Maybe.
if he has these multiple antennas, he will probably be using them all the time. So the factor in front of log will be just a constant. So it wouldn't affect much of his optimization program.
No, I
It
think
will boost his rate by a factor of 4, let's say, but the point will be still the same.
In the previous set of results, he found, it was kind of a complex set of trade-offs having that
Because
previous.
the simplistic way of looking at MIMO, you suddenly miraculously got 4 times smaller frequency. Having 4 antennas equivalent of having 1 antenna but 4 times more frequency.
I think what happened here is that we converged on this model for downlink communication that the more spectrum you have, you should use power in proportion. Like that, it's based on a spectral mass requirement. And then the question was somehow, we didn't get to the next question. So we're stuck with this first question of, well, should you be buying spectrum with a low nu or a high nu? What from the service provider perspective should he? Because in fact, right, maybe what will happen in some higher level problems, it's considered is that you're going to pay more money to operate at higher nu, right? And even if you get a better efficiency. So
I would say if you have
so
a
we're
MIMO
trying
outside-
to get to somehow understanding that question. And I guess what it means is, if some other paper to write, put pre-log efficiencies.
So I would say those would add on to the set of results we already have. We'll have some insights and results from here, and then of course, if you have a MIMO sort of pre-log thing, that's a whole new set of results. But these might serve as a baseline cases where we don't have MIMO, just by. So again, so the point which I wanted to impress upon was increasing a spectral density is another way of saying we are switching onto a better technology. And of course, that is a decision by the service provider, whether or not at what spectral density to transmit at. That's a decision he has to make. And that depends upon his own spectral cost, and we'll see how. And again, the prices which the users are charged also depend on all these parameters. And if the prices are too high, the user can refuse service also. And that's what we see over here. So the system model is as follows. XJ, as I said, is the spectrum which user J gets. And let this be the user utility. This is just a function. This is just a rate. So this is the payment of user J. If he declines service due to high price, he doesn't buy any spectrum, he doesn't pay anything. If he buys some positive spectrum, he pays a fixed price kappa, as I said before, and a variable spectrum usage cost. So the optimization of user J is, again, is maximizing his surplus, his utility minus his cost. So the first order condition of this optimization is just taking the derivative with respect to xj, which gives you the condition that your spectrum price is derivative of your utility with respect to spectrum, and this is actually a demand function because this says that given a particular price mu, what is the spectrum you want. So this is a demand function of spectrum, and this is a new thing over here, the optimization of the service provider. If you see, mu of x is the total usage cost he gets from all the users, Since there are a total of L users, this is the total subscription fee collects from all the L users, and minus the cost he has to pay the broker. So this is his optimization. He optimizes mu and k.
So can you tell me what a reasonable number is for C and T, what their scales are?
I have some graphs later on. So.
Okay.
I think they're fictitious.
I know, because look, you're saying C has something to do with buying spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And if you sort of understand how spectrum is bought, the scale of C is something else. Then
So
you're
do we-
saying T is some cost related associated with transmit power.
So to be very
Right?
honest, I don't
So
have.
I don't know how you're going to add that up, right? I mean, so this is sort of where it gets into things where, I mean, look, it's all nice math, no question about it. But in terms of sort of really trying to sort of get a handle on this cost, right? I'm not saying it's easy.
No,
Don't
to
take
be
it as a
very
criticism.
honest, I don't have practical numbers because the reason is there's no system out there which really does allocation by spectrum in such short time scales. So,
So I don't think it's even that. I think it's just, even if you say you're buying spectrum, right? Again, I don't know what a short time scale is. According to your time scale, it's like a channel that's not changing at all, right? So therefore,
Okay.
let's not get into time scale.
no, okay, what I meant
Yeah,
is.
so let's not go
okay,
there.
okay, that's a wrong word to use. What I meant
Yeah.
is there's no system which sells spectrum only to like maybe do 10 users for one session duration. Like typically for cellular things, we have like
So-
dollars per megahertz per point of presence. But a point of presence defined by a million users in Manhattan. or
So
something
in
like
a
that.
cellular, what do you think C and T are?
So the way we define it is, the way we define it is, we say, how does these prices relate to your rate? So we say how does, let's say, $1 relate to 1 megabits per 1 Mbps? So if you say that $1 is equal to 1 Mbps, then we have some sort of value of C. So our C is, as I say, is basically units, dollars per unit. So it really relates on to how Mbps relates to.
I think these are business school parameters in the sense that, well, you can infer a C from, for this many megahertz, Verizon pays, Big Frank Hill, is specialized. in
Absolutely. So
this
I
many
can
billions
tell
of
you numbers for
dollars.
these things, right? But I don't know how I would
And,
add them up on the
carrying
same,
cost
in the
in
same
terms of
equation.
the
That's what I'm
interest
saying.
on
No, I
that payment
understand.
is something, and it, this many customers and that kind of reuse. And T, right, versus new, right, has to do with, did you buy GSM equipment at a certain price corresponding to a certain kind of rate per hertz versus maybe buying a third or fourth generation technology, and it, you'd have one set of numbers for choices in 1996 and different numbers in 2008, and I mean, I think that the point is that that I don't think we have any real expertise in setting those numbers, but we try to just understand what.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying, I completely agree with you on everything you've said, except that I'm not sure or comfortable about adding them up. I don't know what that means, right? Because it seems like physically they're two different things. I mean, I go by spectrum. Somebody said it's $1 per megahertz per pop now. Like last year when people did the auction, then it was $10 or $14 per megahertz per pop in 2001. So we can talk about numbers like that, right? Whatever they mean has to do with the economic circumstances.
Yeah,
But then
that's
you're
right.
adding some power cost, which I don't know what.
So maybe
what it
there's
means.
some conversion
I
factor.
don't have an intuition for it. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I can't say.
Yeah.
For 700 megahertz spectrum auction last year, the price was roughly speaking $1,000 per 1 hertz.
Dollar per megahertz. Dollar per megahertz per pop.
A pop?
Pop.
Per pop, yeah.
Yeah.
Per pop. $1 per megahertz per pop. And
But if you said, I'm going to do a GSM deployment, right, and operating at certain, bits per second per hertz, right, or I'm going to do a latest generation Qualcomm deployment, right, the base stations, the chipsets in the phones, it's all in this other term, right? That,
I think we should just move ahead. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Hey, you were here for a week, you said, man.
yeah, so I showed you just to refresh. So this was the optimization of the service provider. And this is an example of a stack overflow game. What I mean is the users follow the prices that the service provider sets. which is given by this equation, and we assume that the service
So
provider.
Joydeep, this is just a downlink now, right?
This is a downlink here. So we assume that the service provider know this condition. So we assume that the service providers can anticipate the user behavior, and they can set a particular mu and kappa to induce the users to act in a certain way. So we solved this problem, and we found that in the solution, the service provider will increase this mu and kappa values till one user's utility becomes exactly 0. Because if prices increase any further, this user will refuse service. Actually, this should be surplus. Not really surplus.
Yeah, so
Surplus is exactly 0. And this user is known as the marginal user because it's indifferent from accepting service or not. And so how do we choose this mu and kappa? There are actually different ways to choose mu and kappa so that the surplus becomes 0. And in the thesis, we have a closed form expression of how this usage cost mu depends on usage cost that the service provider charges the user depends on the spectrum cost that he pays to the broker. We derive that relationship, and then we show that once this usage cost has been decided, the subscription fee kappa is chosen to extract the surplus of this marginal guy. So if you look at this equation, this was the surplus, this was the utility of the user j, let's say user j is marginal, minus the spectrum cost he paid. So this is the residual utility, the surplus he has. And we set kappa exactly equal to this. So the marginal guy has exactly 0 surplus. So who is this marginal user? So we consider different sorts of utilities, logarithmic utilities and exponential utilities, and we found that in most of the cases, the guy with the weakest link gain to the service provider is the marginal user. His surplus gets over fast. And by the way, he's also the one who gets the least rate for a given spectrum. So we have some results about how costly the spectrum is to users. So if you again remember, mu versus cost which the service provider charges the users, and C of S is the cost which he paid to the broker. And we find that if the user utilities are logarithmic, which is just log of 1 plus r, then this mu is always greater than C of S. So the broker is always charging the users higher than what he himself paid. However, if the utilities are, let's say, exponential, there are regimes where the broker actually charges less to the users than what he paid for. And the intuition is as follows. Let's say in regimes where you have already given in user has lots of spectrum. And if you remember, the exponential utility is kind of flattened out. So if you charge him most for spectrum, he's not really going to buy anything. So because the additional demand of spectrum is less, the most smart thing to do is the service provider lowers the spectrum cost, and that sort of incentivizes users to buy lots of spectrum, and that kind of leads to a high user surplus. And that's shown by this figure. It's I don't have time to really explain it in detail, but what it basically says, this basically plots a demand function of user j. So you have price of spectrum over here and the amount of spectrum he wants. So if you really keep a low spectrum cost mu, he gets a high, he buys a lot of spectrum, and this shaded area is actually the surplus. And this we show in the thesis, that if you plot the demand function, and this shaded area gives you the amount of surplus that you have. So you have to take my word for it right now. So the bottom line is, if you charge a low spectrum usage cost, there's going to be a high user surplus, and you can benefit by increasing your subscription fee and not charging a higher usage cost. So the service provider decision whether or not to charge a high entry fee or charge a high usage cost, the answer is really depends on what kind of utilities these users have. And again, some numerical results, pretty much the same situation as before. We have like one provider and in this particular example 10 users spaced uniformly, and we have the same cost 231 channel model as before. And let me again walk you through this result. So what we have over here is the spectrum cost, again dollars per hertz, and the profit of the service provider. And here the service provider is transmitting at different spectral efficiencies, which if you remember correspond to different technologies. And what we plot is the profit of the provider, which is nothing but if you remember, this mu times capital X is what it got from the users, and CS times capital X is what it paid to the broker. So this is the profit times the subscription fee.
So what is the units of the y-axis?
So the unit of y-axis is what we call unit. Let me see. So this profit is
I think that you, it's.
so
I think it's.
I'm asking it
it's actually again.
because we've been down this road.
So in the work we have a notion of how one, maybe I should have a slide on it if you have that one. It's basically how one unit of rate relates to 1 unit of a dollar. So let's say one megabit per second is $1. Then this 6 would mean $6. If a user is willing to pay 1 megabit per second for $1, then this would mean $6. However, if one user is willing to pay $10 for 1 megabit per second, just an example, then this would be like $60. So that's how it relates. So, so the message from this graph is, let's focus on this regime. So in this regime, there's a high spectral cost, and we see that if he transmits with a better technology, he gets the maximum profit. However, that's not the truth in this regime. In this regime, the spectral cost per unit spectrum is less, and he's actually losing if he's transmitting at a better technology. And the intuitive reasons, these are not the exact rigorous mathematical reasons, but the intuitive reasons are as follows. If your spectrum cost is very high, the cost of the broker is dominated by the spectrum cost. However, the user utility still goes up if you transmit at a better technology. So his incentive is to transmit at a better technology. Whereas this is not true at the low efficiency, low spectral cost regime. So the message from this graph is,
So what will happen to these curves if I make t 0?
Make what 0? T
Capital
0?
T.
So if t is 0, then actually I'm always in the, there is no high cost and low cost. So I'm always in the high cost regime, which means it will always be better to transmit at a good technology. So there is no cost associated with transmitting a high technology. That's what is modeled by T. So the message from this graph is, it is not always efficient to transmit at a better technology. Because if your spectrum is very cheap, it means you might as well just buy lots of spectrum and just do BPSK. And there is some empirical evidence to support our claim. Let's look at the cellular industry. Like, there's so much of advancements going on right now. Like, they're investing in MIMO, network MIMO. And one of the reasons is because spectrum is very expensive to them. They spend billions of dollars in getting spectrum in auctions. So
Spectrum is cheaper than it was 10 years ago for much better spectrum. Like if you look at the auctions from last year, they bought spectrum that is beachfront property, right, in terms of spectrum, and they paid like about a factor of 15 less, I think.
But that's still compared to still cellular auctions of today. But in even absolute terms, it's not a cheap spectrum. It's not free.
Not to make
think
sort
it
of cellular
depends,
an example
but
and make
I think
statements
that
like that.
depends on where the users are on their demand curves.
Again, this is just,
Have any users?
again, these are the rigorous,
They don't know who the users are.
I mean, this is,
Well, yeah, so the users are being satisfied in terms of cell phones, right? And if you say, oh, the auctions 10 years ago were for spectrum, where you looked and said, oh, like, this is right now what spectrum is available for providing for the users, right? And spectrum has become available for new user applications have not emerged, right? I mean, and also you could say, oh, maybe 10 years ago, they just paid too much, right? It's hard to make a comparison.
I mean, again, this is not a rigorous justifying what I just said, but this just showing that there's some sort of understanding that a higher spectrum cost might lead to providers actually investing in better technology. Because spectrum is so expensive that they really have to invest in making better spectral efficiency. And that's what we see in this graph as well.
Yeah, but I think at some level the demand model has to be in picture, because 10 megahertz are given to public safety and 10 megahertz given to cellular industry. spectrum pricing is very different because the demand satisfied underlying model is very different, right?
Yeah, you're right.
So here somehow that is not captured. You
Here
can
the
say
demand
that-
was like modeled by the exponential utility functions. Like demand was, as I said, was exponential utility. So all this, okay, right, this is for the exponential utility, which leads to a demand function that initially the demand increases slowly and then it flattens out, which of course doesn't model those cases which you said. And you're right, if we have like very critical things where spectrum is critically needed, you need that much spectrum, maybe the graph is different. But we felt that the exponential utilities kind of models a lot of applications which have target rates. So for at least for them, these graphs make sense.
But I think the basic conclusions, right, is spectrum is very, very cheap, right? People are better off buying lots of spectrum and building low technology systems.
If oil is cheap, you can drive a gasoline.
You know, you might as well use BPSK and do it as cheap as possible. The fact is, all the technology we're putting into cellular is a concept, and the reason we all have jobs, right, is because of false scarcity, right, keeping the price high and having a need for a lot of high efficiency wireless technology.
I mean, it's kind of similar to the oil situation. If oil is cheap and plenty, you drive a SUV.
Exactly.
You drive a
Yeah.
Prius.
Exactly.
UWB was an attempt to get rid of spectrum constraint. It was killed by politics.
Well, okay, so but so it's not clear if it was killed politically because politics dictated our constraint or physically, that's somebody else's thesis.
Good question. So if you assume every cost parameter and the probability to be constant is time invariant,
Again, if it changes, we do the allocation again. I mean, we carry out the optimization again. For the duration of this problem, yeah, there's some fixed C and is there
yeah. So take for example, if you use your cellular phone to make long distance call, right? So every evening after 9 o'clock, it's unlimited. If you enroll in it's the data plan.
Yeah, I didn't consider all those things, correct. I mean,
Okay. So the
Here-
effort was just to execute your optimization after
Yeah.
a certain time and then find another data for different time periods for the day. So that it still works.
yeah, again, like all these are for a duration of a particular session where there's fixed the demand and depending on the user, some mu and k are calculated. So if you remember, mu and k were calculated to optimize the service for their profits. So what you are saying is then apply directly here, where you maybe after 9 you give the users off. I mean that for that you have to involve lot more other things, other physical effects. Over here we have we include more than one service provider. So again the same diagram as you've seen before. So there's a broker who sells service provider I, the buys spectrum capital XI, and the broker charges the provider I the same charges as before. So in the downlink, it allocates spectrum X sub ij to user J. Service provider I charges a price mu sub I. We assume that there is no connection fee in this model because if you remember the connection fee in the previous model, there's a connection fee which depends on the user cost, so that exactly surplus was gouged out. That was a monopolistic feature. So over here in price competition, such a usage fee dependent connection, usage cost dependent connection fees cannot be supported because of competition. So we just assume there is a fixed usage cost. And again, service provider I transmits at efficiency nu I as before. So again, no fixed power constraint, and so now the spectral efficiency from service provider I to user J, case of Ij is given by this log expression. So now we define this parameter called effective price from user I, service provider I to user J, and this comes up in a formulation, and this is nothing but the actual price mu sub I divided by the spectral efficiency k sub ij, and this we call the effective price. So again, so this is the effective price which we call p sub ij, and if you really see mu sub I, the units was basically dollars per hertz, and the unit of P sub ij comes out to be dollars per unit of rate. So your effective price relates how, because you are buying spectrum, but what you are ultimately interested in increasing your rate. So this is a conversion factor. This shows how much are you willing to pay for unit of rate. And these are some results which we derived in the thesis. We show that this spectrum price mu sub I has a bound, and the first bound is it's always overpriced. That is, service provider I always sells to the users at a higher cost than what it bought from the broker. So this is again C plus T times mu I. And we also show that user J accepts service only if this usage cost is less than K sub ij, which effectively means it only buys service from a service provider for whom the effective price is less than 1. So let's say there's a bunch of these service providers for whom the effective price is less than 1. So we are able to show that even for this case, the user J will choose only one service provider. If you remember, this result was true even in the uplink model. That each user had a fixed power constraint. Over here we have downlink and we don't have fixed power constraint. Even then we showed that this result is true. That user J will choose only one service provider, and we show that this service provider is the one who has the least effective price to that user. And here are some interpretations. Let's say for a fixed usage cost, if a user has a better link gain, he has a higher value of spectral efficiency. So that user sees a lower effective price. Other interpretation could be if a service provider was varying his usage cost mu I, for those users who have a good link gain to the service provider, they have a higher case of ij. So even if the user service provider has increased his usage cost, the users might still see lesser effective price. So they would be able to tolerate a higher mu sub I because this ratio might still be less than 1. So I won't go through the details of the exact solution, but to make you understand, we'll go through some sub-problems which lead to the solution of the overall multiple SP problem. There are two sub-problems. The first one is where you consider only one service provider and multiple users. So this is slightly different from the monopolist case they considered last time and the last set of results, because now we just have usage cost. And the next case is we have two service providers and one user, and from insight from both of them we can combine and get the results where there are two service providers and many users. So the first case is when we have one service provider and just a toy example, let's say there are 5 users arranged like this. If you remember, these we have talked about already. So again, the user 1 has the highest value of kj because he's closest, and user 5 has the lowest value of kj. So over here I plotted the spectrum price. So since k1 is highest, since k5 is least, it's like close to 0. And we have two graphs over here. This is supposed to be an animation. So over here what we have is, let's focus on this bold graph. This bold graph is for one particular value of broker cost C1. So let's see what really happens. So let's consider this tiny range C1 to K5. So in this range the price is really low, so all users accept service. Then let's consider this case from K5 to K4. So you increase the price so that the furthest user, which is user 5, finds spectrum too pricey and he opts out of servicing. He says, I won't accept service. In this range K4 to K3, spectrum price is very high, so the last two users 3, 4 and 5 don't accept service. If you see there is small like break in this point, that's because one user dropped out of service. So this graph basically plots how the service provider profit changes as it changes spectrum price. Now if you get to this range, cost is very high, so only user 1 is served because he's closest, so he can tolerate a higher price, as I said before. So if you see from this graph, you see that it's optimal for service provider to charge a price which corresponds to this, because over here his profit is maximized. So the intuition is he doesn't have to serve all the users. He can actually choose to raise the price and exclude some users, because in that way he can charge a higher price. And this is clear from this diagram. And in the thesis we have an exact analytical expression to say that given a number of users and link gains, how do you decide how many users to serve? So that's in the thesis. By the way, this broken line is another graph where this broker cost is higher. So we just see that if the broker cost is higher, it's optimal for him to serve at a higher price and serve less end users. So that was the intuition behind the case where one service provider and many users. So the next case is let there be two service providers and only one user. So what happens in that case? So let's say it's a hierarchical game where initially there is only one service provider, and he's, let's say, set some price P of 0. So whatever is inside the brackets is a time index. So let's say time 0, I have only one service provider. He charges a price P of 0 and the user goes to him. Let's say the next time instant service provider 2 enters the system. So now service provider 2 looks at what's happening and he has two options. First option, he decides to withdraw. He says, I'm not going to compete with service provider 1, and that's fine. The other option is he decides to compete with service provider 1. In order to do so, he sets an effective price Q, and this 1 is because the time is 1. And he has to set an effective price which is lesser than the effective price the service provider 1 had set. Because if you remember, the users connect to service providers with lowest effective prices. So he sets an effective price less than T0. The next time instant 2, service provider 1 can do the same thing. He can look at Q1 and decide to withdraw the system. Or he can decide to compete by setting a price P of 2, which is again less than Q of 1. And the game evolves in this way. So what happens at the end? So let's make some assumptions. So what is the minimum value of this sequence, P of T? So P of T is again the sequence of effective prices that service provider 1 sets. If you remember, P of T is nothing but mu of I divided by K of Ij. And mu of I cannot be less than the broker cost. That was what I had shown 2 slides earlier. So the minimum value of this sequence is given by this number, and let's call it Pj of min. And similarly, service provider 2 also has a minimum value. And just for the sake of argument, let's assume that service provider 1 has a lower value of this minimum cost. So what happens is, if this game keeps on evolving, ultimately we'll reach a time t. At some time t, service provider 1 can compete and set a price P of t which is lower than the minimum minimum effective price of service provider 2. So at the next time instant, there is no way in which service provider 2 can compete, because if it had to compete, it has to set a price lower than this, which is not allowed. So what really happens in this game is, right in the beginning, at time instant 1, service provider 2 decides to withdraw. Why? Because if it decides to compete, ultimately it has to withdraw anyways, because there is no way it can compete with service provider 1. In other words, in the language of extensive games, in game theory, we say that the threat of service provider to compete is not credible. So what happens in this game is, service provider 2 enters at time instant 1, it does all this optimization, or rather than saying it does it, maybe the broker coordinates this game, and it decides to withdraw. And service provider 1 can now just set the same price P of 0, assuming there is no competition. And this P of 0 is derived in the previous slide, where there was only one service provider and n users. So that's how the game evolves.
So how do these service providers know all these Q-mins and P-mins?
So we assume that the game is mediated by the broker, because if you remember the broker in between, maybe the broker knows the link gains, and as he enters the system, it transmits his request to the broker.
So basically you're saying that once P-min and Q-min are known, there is no game really, because you immediately know whether you stand a shot or not.
Yeah, you could get that. Or I can say that the game would have went on, and as I said, like, the equilibrium of this game is just over here. The game ends in the first step. Because that's how the extensive games are modelled. Like, even if it ends right there, to see that expression, I have to plot all histories, even those histories don't move after if the game was played on. So only if I plotted all the histories, I conclude that the game will end right at this step.
Yeah, what's the conclusion there though? I mean,
The conclusion here is, for any, if there are only one user, there's only going to be one SP who is possible, who will have a lowest value of effective
No,
price.
that's what I understand, but the ultimate thing here is that the.
Ultimate thing is here is that service provider 2 will not come.
Yeah, let me ask the question. It sounds like the result points towards a monopoly where the monopolist can set whatever price they like. Or, I mean, that seems to be, so basically at the outset, you can't compete. So,
You can say so, yeah. It boils down to this case, which I showed on the previous slide, where there is only one service provider. So this is different from the monopoly because I didn't have the subscription fee cap on. Because that was really the monopoly's tool of gouging out all the surplus, which is not allowed in a competitive environment. So apart from that, yeah, it's a single service provider with only usage cost case.
and where the cost can be set well above PMIN.
Exactly, it will be set well above payment. Because the threat that the other service provider will come in and undercut you in prices is not credible. Because if he starts doing that, this game would evolve and ultimately he won't win. So he knows this right in the beginning and says, okay, I'm withdrawing, I won't engage in the game. So that is what really happens. And then service provider 1 can go back and charge a price much higher than PMIN.
And my source of confusion here is what you mean by this. I mean, I got this some theoretical statement about it not being credible in a practical sense when I think of when another competing provider comes and says he's going to offer a lower price. What is the tangible reason the user doesn't move to him if he has a comparable link gain? And
No, he doesn't actually offer that service. So that's what I meant in the beginning. Because if he had started offering that service, then the original provider would also go on reducing the prices. Right? So the policy of the provider is not to go and transmit a price. It's like first announcing whether he's going to offer a service or not. I'm saying that right in the very beginning he says, I'm not going to offer, he mediates with the broker and the broker tells him, don't do this because...
So I don't even understand where there is competition here. You're saying that at the outset you're saying once PMIN and QMIN are known, and you're saying the broker knows it, then why bother with all this? I mean, you're saying essentially give it to the best. I think then he'll send
I am.
back to
The reason I'm saying it is because of all these things. Yeah, you can say at the end there is no competition, but that
I don't
doesn't
call
only-
that as competition. I mean, I wouldn't use the word competition to describe what you just described.
No, but this is still a game, right? I'm saying, okay, let this sort of happen. There would have been a game where each instant they were setting a price, and I'm saying this is an extensive game, and the Nash equilibrium or a subdomain buffer equilibrium of this extensive game is this state.
No, I understand that, but I sort of see this. So what is the message here? I have to go back and ask what Chris was saying.
The message over here is service provider 2 comes and decides that he won't compete.
Yeah, that's a lower level message. The higher level message seems to be that there's some level of, if you're worried about consumers, there's some level of protection that needs to happen. This is not a new thing in economics.
This is very standard. If you're not the low cost provider to get out of the market. And then
Yeah,
whatever the market,
that's what it basically means.
in places where there's multiple providers, it's because they all are about the same cost, or they're confused about their costs.
So
Like
all the
airlines.
things which we end up is like our system, these models end up in a
I
situation where there is.
I think the reason why you don't see that is because there's dynamics.
Oh, okay, there's
So
dynamics.
that sort of, I think
Yeah.
that was sort of essentially what we were all trying
Sure.
to get at. Right, I mean, in this sort of setting, I'm not really sure what to.
But so this
What is
has,
next?
there is a, so this is kind of in this, the distillation to one user, right? Ultimately, there is no competition, but in a moment, we'll have some more users and
Yeah, I'd like
we'll see the consequence.
So again, so now we have the most general case. It's not really most general because this is two service providers and more users. It's again model is an extensive game, and the SP strategy is number of users they attempt to serve. So to understand that, again, let's take another simple example, which is like 2 service providers and 2 users. Let's say something like this. So the way the game evolves is, initially service provider 1, he can decide to serve whether 1 user or 2 users. So let's say he wants to serve one user 1, or he wants to serve both the users. So then service provider 2 comes and decides whether or not to compete for both users or only 1 user. If he decides to compete for only 1 user, it's the user that closest to it. Which means he wants to serve user 2, or maybe he wants to serve both. So in this case, it's pretty clear because there's no overlap between the users. So user 1 goes to service provider 1 and user 2 goes to service provider 2, and they can set the prices because there's no competition. In this case, user 2 goes to service provider 2. However, there's an overlap for the user because both providers want it. So for this user, I have a case which I just described in the last slide. Like there's one user and two providers want to attend. So what will happen is, again, the user who, even the provider who has the lowest possible value of effective price, the user is going to go to that provider. And we will have similar cases for these two. So for this simple case, we now have a game and we have the 4 possible outcomes, and we have characterized the payoffs also. Because the payoffs over here is the profit of the service providers. There is a pair, profit of service provider 1, profit of service provider 2, which can be calculated. So we have like a 2-level game and 4 possible outcomes with the payoffs, and then we can look at them and choose the path which leads to the equilibrium. Maybe the equilibrium is just over here. That each provider ends up serving the users closest to it. Or maybe the equilibrium is service provider 1 ends up serving both the users because PS is very, very efficient. So that really depends upon the link gains and the efficiencies. So as I said, this algorithm was just to give an intuition. It can be generalized to multiple users. And what we see at the end, the service provider 1 ends up serving user set. He gets his own customer set S1. For this model, it's the ones who are the closest to it. And in that set, there's no competition from the other service provider. And similar for the other provider also. And these sets depend upon the link gains and efficiencies. Maybe if all the users are clustered on one provider, they all go to him. So our models kind of seem to give regions where we have like local areas of coverage where each provider ends up serving the closest set of users and charging them at a high price. Yeah.
So in this model and the previous one also, you explicitly assume that the competing service providers know each other's minimum
I do that.
cost.
Again, the justification is this game is sort of mediated by the broker.
So my question was, if they don't know this, then you have some insight about what happens in this price war. Does it still happen?
I haven't looked into it, but yeah, essentially the war would still happen, but then we're to move into games with like incomplete information. So maybe they have some notion about how the prices develop, so they do some expected. Maybe they know the distribution of prices.
I'm just wondering if the final outcome is more efficient.
But isn't this more the case of then you actually have to play the game? Like I underestimate your real minimum cost. So we play the game, we eventually get to a place where like I name a price that's the lowest price I can name without going out of business, right? And you underprice me, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. I better get out of here. So I end up abandoning the market after suffering a lot.
Knowing this is not a big deal. If you really look at if you really think how this could possibly work, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to be advertising prices all the time. And that's going to be public information for everybody. If you're really talking about sort of dynamic,
But it seems
kind
like
of
the
model.
lowest price you can hit rock bottom should be
Yeah,
your
but I-
private information.
Yeah, but
No,
I'm
that
just
depends on
saying,
the
I can know from memory. I can go do a competition. Last time you showed up, me and him were competing to get you, and then we figured out what
No,
happened.
the lowest price.
So therefore,
depends-
that sort of thing, right? I think is very
the lowest price
quite
depends on
readily
what,
available if you really think about these kinds of models.
the lowest price depends on what cost the broker is charging you. C plus. So it's really not that private.
Yeah, but
So
the
you know, I'm
transaction
trying to
price-
understand this, what you've done here. Can you show me what the objectives of the SP, of each SP are, and show me what the objective functions for this multiple user models?
So again, the objective functions are just to maximize their profit. So, and the profit is maximized by
So
serving.
this is, you're going back and using all the math you did before for the single SP thing?
Yeah.
And now each SP
So
has
in,
its
so
own,
in
each
of these
SP has
things,
its
like-
own profit.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me finish. So each SP has its own profit function,
Yeah.
right? And then the users have some utility.
Yeah.
Utility minus cost or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
So now tell me how this is working.
So, let's look at this example. So we have like these 4 outcomes, right? In this outcome, it says user 1 goes to service
No,
provider
no,
1.
no, no. I don't want the outcome. I want the problem.
Yeah, coming to it. So what? So this leads to what the profits. This outcome corresponds to a profit of the service provider 1 if this outcome happens. So that's what you're asking. So now the service provider has to calculate what profit it would get if it just served user 1, and that depends upon. So it just plays a single provider, one user game with the.
No, but doesn't the user have its own utility, or
Yeah,
are we
so-
back to a non-strategic situation?
No, they have a utility. So
How is it? I'm trying to understand. Did you model this as a? You talked about a Stackelberg game at some point.
So this,
Right.
Yeah, it's a Stackelberg game. So let's see this. So the profit of the provider is this, right? Profit of
Yes.
the provider,
No,
and
for a
this-
single provider, I understand it. I'm trying to understand it for a multiple provider case. I'm trying to understand your game for the multiple. You see my question? Single provider, no problem.
Yeah.
When you have two providers, I'm trying to understand the game.
So the
I mean,
game,
you just showed me the extensive form. That doesn't tell me what the game is.
So the first stage of the game is to determine how many users you end up serving, and after that you determine if you serve this many users, what are the profit you get, and that you do by solving a Stackelberg game where you say if you serve only one user, and this user has an exponential utility, then he is going to demand this much of spectrum, and maybe I can, and this is a profit I get.
I still don't understand it. A Stackelberg game, right? Essentially, is a leader-follower game.
Yeah,
There's a leader, bunch of followers. Leader takes an action. Followers basically do something.
yeah.
So now, when you have two users, two providers,
So right now in this
I'm
stage,
trying to see how this stack. I mean, have you formulated? Is there some game
okay,
you
so
formulated, or are you just sort of talking
there is
about?
no Stackelberg game right now.
So you're just talking about an extensive form that you
Yeah.
created in terms of outcomes, but I still
Yeah.
haven't understood
So
what
I'm
the
saying
objective.
the outcomes, right? Once I get to this outcome, how do I translate from this outcome to a service provider profit? So just for this box, there is Stackelberg game. In this box, I'm saying I'm given that user 1 is connecting to service provider 1. So what does it mean in terms of service provider 1 profits? To calculate that, now service provider 1 plays a Stackelberg game with user 1, and it charges because he knows his utility. And he can calculate his profit. So right over here, there is no Stackelberg game, but once these outcomes are fixed, to get from the outcome to the profit, there is a Stackelberg game.
But then, how do users sort of use their utilities sort of along these, in sort of making decisions or taking decisions?
Users
So
don't.
I mean, there is an Stackelberg game has a very clear form.
Yeah.
There's a very clear mathematical formulation for it, and I'm failing to see it in this I'm missing something, I think.
What I'm saying is the users don't even have to engage in all these steps. If you really think about it,
No,
I can
no.
say, I can
That's
say
something
that,
else. You're talking about something else. I'm talking about sort of a problem formulation, right?
Mhm.
I don't understand how this is formulated as a Stackelberg game. For a single provider and multiple users, it's very clear. No problem. This one, I'm having difficulty understanding where the stack.
Yeah, I think I.
You see my question?
What he's saying is that if you, as an example, if you take a one particular state where he's saying user 1 is associated with service provider 1, user 2 is associated with SP2.
Right, but how does that
Each of
happen?
That state, service provider 1 will.
Yeah, but that's sort of
So, that
seems a little artificial.
so I can say I've sort of like combined two games. Like this is one game where this is okay. Forget the Stackelberg game. Let's say I just knew what the outcomes were. Let's say the outcomes in this case was, let's say service provider 1 gets utility 10 and service provider 2 gets utility 20. Let's say in this box it's 5 and 15. So similarly, I have like 4 such boxes.
Yeah, but the users also have their own boxes, right? That's
Yeah,
what I'm
so,
trying
so
to
I'm
understand.
saying instead of 10 and 20, that 10 and 20 figures will come out of a Stackelberg game. So I have a Stackelberg game for each boxes, because even if you remember in the previous case, right, I played a Stackelberg game where there's one provider and he knew how many users he'll serve. So if such a situation is given, he can play a Stackelberg game and find out his prices. I'm saying those situations arise in these boxes because I fix my outcomes. Service provider 1 user, maybe here service provider 1.
Look, I'll tell you what the problem I'm having, right? You've written an extensive form for the service provider,
Yeah.
but I'm asking where is the extensive form for the user? You can talk about an extensive form where you say the user sort of go through a set of decisions. And I'm sort of not seeing that here. That's where my confusion is. I mean, you sort of posed this, right, and said like, okay, here's the extensive form from the service provider point of view, right? And then you say, here are the set of states or outcomes. And then you said each of these, I'll figure out what the metrics are, right, using sort of some Stackelberg game. But that's a little different if you really think about this, right, as sort of a competition. There are two guys, and there are a bunch of users. And each user can go to any of these guys, right? And those guys can compete for every one of them or they can compete for them all at the same time. There are many ways in which you can
Yeah,
sort of
you're right.
compete.
I mean,
So therefore, I don't understand anything about what you're saying about cycle per game, right? You just decided to sort of say, I'm going to do an extensive form with these service providers.
You're right. I mean,
And I think if you say that, I'm okay with that. But I don't think you're saying something
okay,
that
it's
seems...
not you're right. It's
Got
not a
it?
game in the
Okay.
way you say.
Got it.
So I am in a way forcing these different assignments and
Got it.
just
Okay, if
to
you
calculate
say that,
the-
then I'm okay with it. Because it seems
it's
that
not
you
a,
looked
it's
at...
not a situation which you just mentioned. That's
Yeah.
that's
So, I mean, if I look at it, in some sense, you're showing the state space, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, how do you ensure that you pick a particular state and put the game in that indicated by that particular state?
So for
as
each
an
of the
example,
state
if I take the
spaces-
bottom rightmost corner, that's one state of
Yeah, this two-
assignment. Yeah.
So for each of the states, I calculate what the SP payoffs are. And that I can calculate because in each of the states, a service provider ends up serving some users. So I calculate the service provider payoffs for each of the states, and then I choose like which path is gives you the is equilibrium. So again, the last slide over here. So in the y-axis, so these are case for the two service providers and 100 users in between. So y-axis is the fraction of customers which service provider 1 gets, and x-axis is again a service spectrum cost. The service provider 2 was technology was fixed, and we are varying the technology of service provider 1. And what we see is something similar as what we saw in the last set of slides. We see that if spectrum cost is high, then in order to get a higher share of the market, service provider 1 must transmit at a higher technology. Whereas if spectrum cost is very low, I mean he doesn't really have to do that. So it's the same message as before. And that kind of brings me to the end of the centralized DSA models. And to summarize, our models consider the joint optimization from broker to service providers and service provider users, considering both their motives. It's kind of simple, but gives interesting insights about how service provider efficiency, spectrum, price, and allocations relate to each other. And we consider effects of social welfare, effects of monopoly, and effects of competition. And there are really lots of possible extensions. Like if you consider that the broker is some sort of government entity, how does he set this spectrum cost C, which we haven't looked into at all? Because if he increases C, he forces the service providers to pay more money. So maybe he can get more taxes by increasing C. The other side is if he increases C, each service provider ends up serving only the users who are very close to it, because the service provider has to increase the spectrum price mu also. So maybe the government should reduce C to improve coverage. These are questions, open questions. And again, what are the real effects of competition? Let's say a service provider goes to a market, he sees that there are other competitive service providers out there. So does he decide to enter, set up a service at all, or does he decide to withdraw? How about models which just have connection fees, or other pricing models like Michelle was mentioning? And our models for capturing service provider cost are very basic. How about other more detailed models and little user topologies? So they are like possible extensions. And just to quote Gallagher said, it is the intuition from studying many simple models that provides insight about real problems. And we only analyze simplified models of problems, and what really is important is not the particular solution but the insight. And we hope that our models aim to generate insights about the interplay of technology and economics in understanding DSA. And hopefully some of these insights could be used into more involved models. So having said this, I think I just have just 6 more slides, which I just very quickly want to talk about. The other model of DSA, which is Aman's model. So this is a totally different line of work, what I've been talking to you about. So if you got lost or fell asleep, you can like start paying attention once again, because this has nothing to do with the past work. So the regime over here is there are like a whole bunch of uncoordinated transmitters. Let's say it's transmitter 1 and receiver 1, transmitter 2 and receiver 2, and there is absolutely no coordination amongst them. And these people can sense the whole in spectrum and transmit. Let's say there is a total bandwidth of 0 to W, and user 1, there is no service provider now. So user 1 transmits in these bands, and user 2 comes and sees that there is some vacancy F1 to F2 and again F3 to F4 and transmits here. Since these holes could be dynamic, they could change according to how many users in the system. Each user performs a single IFFT over this entire band, and it transmits zeros.
Now we're just seeing where it was in the pieces.
So
Oh,
this
it's
is
in
in
the
chapter
first-
2, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the beginning.
You called it something else, and you had a different title in your thing.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
So each user performs a single IFFT and it transmits zeros corresponding to those tones where the other user is transmitting, and this is called non-contiguous OFDM. And again, there's no centralized control plane. There's no coordination among these entities at all. So it's just a diagram of.
Are they fighting for spectrum or they?
No, they are not. They're just coming and sensing if there's vacant spectrum or not. If
So
there
one
is-
of them came before the other, and the other is just predicting the
Yeah.
photos.
So these are simple examples where there are like two transmitters, and let's say the first transmitter doesn't transmit in the first NY2 tones and sends data in the next NY2 tones. And user 2 comes and senses that the first NY2 tones are empty and transmits data over there. So an OFDM symbol has N data samples and L samples of the cyclic prefix. And let's say for one user, S1 to S of N plus L is one complete OFDM symbol consisting of N plus L samples. So over here we have the N data samples, and this index 1 denotes that is the first user, this index 2 denotes second user. We do a parallel to serial conversion, and let's say the transmitter 1 was switched on after time theta 1. So there is a timing delay of theta 1. So this is what is being transmitted in the channel, and this was transmitted after time theta 2. So what goes in the channel has a delay of theta 2. They get mixed up in the channel. And the job of receiver 1 is to estimate this theta 1 in presence of this interfering sample
JD,
stream.
do you get this hidden terminal problem here?
Hidden terminal.
Yeah. When some transmitter senses that this sub-channel is available, so he puts his data there.
Oh, I see.
But when it
I
reaches
didn't
the
consider
receiver,
that.
actually receiver, from the transmitter standpoint,
I
this
did
channel is
consider
available.
that.
From destination, it's actually taken.
I consider that they can sense perfectly whether it's empty or not. So I think that's
Other question was about the CP insertion, the cyclic prefix insertion.
it happens over here.
I know, but these are two different entities transmitting, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, are repeating your last L bits.
L
over here.
samples,
So,
yeah.
but those L bits are different in two different
Yeah.
transmissions, right?
Yeah, they're different because that depends on the data. So they could be
So
different.
it doesn't matter in terms of. Anyway, you're ignoring that L bit, so it doesn't matter.
So it actually matters in the time sequence, but that's what
That's why
algorithm
it's
is
coming
about.
to-
So
that's why
I'm
that's-
coming to it. So all that matters is those L samples are same. It doesn't need to know what exactly those L samples are. All that matters is there's for one user they are same set of L samples that are repeating. So again, it's different from cellular problem. So because even in cellular we have the same
But
interfering.
these are concurrent transmissions, right?
These are concurrent.
So, and they potentially are colliding transmissions.
Exactly, that's the problem. So that's what we're addressing. So that's exactly the problem. So this is different from cellular because in cellular there's a control plane. Like initially, users synchronize to the base station and they acquire the timing information. Over here, there's absolutely no coordination at all. User just senses vacant spectrum and start transmitting, and the receiver has to somehow receive an sample stream, an RF energy stream, and somehow has to figure out this theta 1.
But the receiver, like Leo said, there is no hidden terminal problem. So implicitly, this seems like there is some sort of control plane.
No, I mean,
He
I'm
just
saying-
ignores the drop of an out.
How does the transmitter know
Control
what the
plane
poles
is-
are at the receiver?
the transmitter no.
What the spectrum
Yes, yes.
poles are at the location of the receiver?
You need a separate random protocol for indicating
sort of
signal out of that signal of some sort.
Yeah, but that. So I'm saying, okay, so one of the messages from this work is, even if you don't assume those, even then it's quite hard to do. So one of the justifications of the thesis I didn't really talk about was we initially started with two different regimes of DSA. One is some sort of centralized and other is total uncoordinated. And one of the things we say is that second result is this is really difficult to do. Even from just a resource allocation point of view, we knew it was difficult, like Professor was in the paper, that it can be really inefficient, the Nash equilibrium. And maybe we should go into Ripollet games to solve that. I'm saying even if you forget all that and just consider the synchronization aspect, it's difficult. And on top of that, if we add all those problems, it even gets harder.
But for a given W, in the interest of time, I'll keep this short. For a given W bit, right, if I a priori put some reference signals in there to assess, does it become simpler?
That's one of the conclusions, yeah.
Okay.
It could. But just total uncoordinated thing is difficult. So again, some insights into single use of OFDM synchronization. Let's say there are 3 OFDM symbols, and the colors which are repeating are the L samples of the prefix. So let's say the receiver switched on at time instant 1, so it has already missed symbol k minus 1 because it's all in the middle. So the best it can do is at time instant t equals theta, it has to detect that a new symbol is starting. So what it does, it performs a sliding window correlation to estimate theta. So what it does is it takes a sample stream, it takes L sample stream, delays them by n samples, takes another L sample stream, performs a correlation between these two, and does a running window correlation. So when it reaches t equals to theta, it should have a peak because these L samples are exactly same as these L samples. And this process is formalized by the Van der Beek algorithm which we use. So the good thing about this is the receiver does not need to know the exact L samples. Else it would have to, there has to be some initial prior signaling to establish a preamble. Over here, all that matters is because of the OFDM's transmission structure, those 2 L samples repeat, and that's all it needs to know. So this is really ideal for this sort of application where there's total lack of coordination, total uncoordinated DSL, because no prior signal is needed. So our work is study the symbol synchronization problem for the case where users are transmitting in non-contiguous bands, and use the Van der Beek algorithm, and there's no instance of any prior work done. So we test the performance of Van der Beek algorithm where there's only one user but he doesn't occupy all the tones. Then we consider the presence of an interfering user, and then we throw in a frequency selective channel. We also derive the optimal cyclic prefix-based ML algorithm for some cases. Then we consider suboptimal approaches, like assuming the receiver had some idea about what band the transmitter was transmitting in, could it filter out just those signals? And our big aim is to, overall motto is to establish whether Van der Beek algorithm and its variance is sufficient, or do we need some other signaling methods, as Milind was mentioning. And again, just to, since I don't have time to go into details, I'll just give you some idea about how the Van der Beek algorithm performs. So it's optimal for single user transmission, optimal if it's a Gaussian channel and there's only one user. The OFDM samples are uncorrelated, if you remember, except of course the prefix because it's repeating. So in presence of frequency selective channel and another user, this is what I get, where this is the channel samples, channel tap. So if there's another user, what can happen is the receiver 1 can end up acquiring the time of user 2, because at the RF level it has no way of distinguishing between these two users. It just sees some RF energy coming in. It can end up acquiring the time of user 2. However, if the times of the two users are close to each other, it might actually help, but that's a rare case. If there's frequency selective fading, it introduces more correlation in this sample stream, and Van der Beek only is optimal if the sample streams are uncorrelated. We could use a filter to remove user 2 signal. So if you, let's say we use a filter D of K, so it suppresses the interfering signal. However, it adds more correlation to your own sample stream. So that's a trade-off. So in priori, it's not really clear which effect dominates. So again, I'll just give a summary of the results. So the metric that we used for evaluation was mean square error divided by L square. Why? So let's take a small example. Let's say we have 4 OFDM samples, B1 to B4, and the prefix was of length 2, we repeated over here. So if we acquired the time correctly, we would have started, this is this blue rectangle, correct. So let's say we make an error 1, so we say that the symbol starts from here. So even for this case, we actually have all the correct samples, but we can just in a different order, but we have all the correct samples. So as long as the timing error is within the cyclic prefix, the data can be recovered with the phase rotation. So what really is interesting is this matrix. So now the set of results is for Gaussian channels, its random peak is optimal when user occupies the full band. It is suboptimal when the user occupies part of the band. However, with respect to this modified metric, the performance is still satisfactory. Timing can be recovered. We derived the optimal ML algorithm also. However, it's of high complexity, so it's not good for practical implementation. Going on to frequency selective channels, again, random peak is suboptimal. However, we show that if we are operating in high or moderate SNR, which could be done by accumulating enough symbols, the random peak gives satisfactory performance. However, if there's an interfering user, we show that if we just try to increase SNR by accumulating symbol, it doesn't help because the interference energy is also increasing. And we show that there can be a lot of situations where simple randomic sort of algorithm gives you really poor results. Except for some cases, maybe if the receiver has, if you're transmitting in only one block of spectrum, and then randomic is okay. But if your signal is spread into multiple small subbands, then which we call as distributed spectral occupancy, we show that randomic sort of algorithms really gives you poor performance. So the bottom line is there can be a lot of situations where simple uncoordinated DSA can give you bad performance for getting the timing. So we should maybe consider other approaches, whether there's some initial signaling or some a priori known preamble. So it's been a long time. So, do you have any questions?
So the punchline is this is not a criticism of NC OFDM.
No.
It is really a criticism of sort of the lack of some kind of a coordination or centralized.
You're saying the total uncoordinated things, it's
That's
hard to do. So, and that's why, that's what it is. So I think,
All right.